Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee, Wednesday, the 6th of December. It's 6 o'clock, so we are starting the meeting. Before we start, may I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, could they please raise their hand in person if sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair and/or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic Officer know. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to agenda item 1 now, which is apologies for absence. I do know we have received some.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. We have 3 apologies. We've got one from Councillor Morgan, we've got one from Councillor Lovelock Edwards, the Vice Chair, and one from the Tenant Representative, Heather Smith.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Oh, Councillor Lloyd Selby.
Yes, just to explain that Councillor Helen Payne is trying to join the meeting, but her laptop is updating, so she'll be with us as soon as she can.
Okay, thank you. Any other apologies for absence? I don't see anybody else wishing to speak. No. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 are minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October 2023. Are we happy to take the minutes on block?
Happy to take the minutes on block.
Councillor Hanks?
Turn it off.
Councillor Hanks, if you'd like to press your request to speak button, we'll bring you back in. Councillor Hanks, yes.
Happy to second those minutes.
Thank
Chair.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any? Oh, Councillor Aviat. Oh, Councillor Aviat, you are on the committee. I'll let you come in first.
Yeah, I'd like to declare.
Councillor Hennessy's clicked first, Chair.
Oh, sorry, yes. Councillor Hennessy.
I'd like to declare an interest in item agenda 4. I'm a personal council tenant, so it's personal, not prejudicial.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Aviat.
Yes, the same thing. I am declaring an interest as I'm a council tenant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haynes, if you'd like to come in. Councillor Aviat, can you switch? Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a committee member of the Paul Lewis Community Centre in St Athan. I can't remember which agenda item it's on. I think it's 6 or 7, but it's a personal interest and not prejudicial, and I reserve the right to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Haynes, can I just double check? What is it in relation to? Which report? Is it the capital or the corporate safeguarding? They've 6 or 7. Is it one of those?
Councillor Haynes.
Right. Sorry, Chair, I was just checking. It's agenda item 7, the capital monitoring.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, the initial, sorry, I should ask, does anybody else have any does anybody else have any declarations of interest? No, I see no more hands. Okay, Councillor Haynes, if you'd like to switch your microphone off now. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, agenda item 4 is the initial housing revenue account budget, revised budget 23-24 and proposals 24-25. I'm going to hand over to Matt and Laura for this.
Good evening, everyone. There's 4 finance papers on your agenda this evening. The first 2 are a couple of references on from Cabinet. The first of which is the revised or half-year HRA position for 2023-24 financial year and some initial proposals for the 24-25 HRA. I've got some slides, just a couple of slides to cover this item that I'll quickly talk you through if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Just bear with us, we're trying to get the slides up.
So just a general reminder, I guess, to people, the housing revenue account is a ring-fenced account and is essentially funded by rental income streams. The annual rental income increase is capped by Welsh Government, and we have a guidance note on that on an annual basis. To increase rents from the 1st of April, the council must set rents for 2024-5 in January. And that's to ensure sufficient notice is given to our tenants. The regulations changed a few years ago on that, and we now need to give 2 months notice of rent increases. The rent notification letter has been received from Welsh Government, which states the maximum rental uplift for 2024-5 is 6.7%, and that's in line with September CPI, which is the standard, which has been a recent approach. Currently, the HRA business plan for 24-5 is modelling, there's a typo on that slide, isn't there? It's for 24-5 is modelling a 5.5% increase for 24-5. Any additional income from an increase over the 5.5% would be used to contribute to funding decarbonisation, Welsh Housing Quality Standards 23 and new builds. And certainly as a service, it's very clear that there's significant demands coming through on decarbonisation and the Welsh Housing Quality Standards. So financial pressures on the HRA over the medium term. The plan is under review, and whilst this is statutory review date of the 31st of March, we'll be bringing that to you significantly earlier. You might recall last year you had the rent setting reports and the HRA business planners separate reports. We're bringing those together this year, which makes a great deal of sense in that you can see the income and expenditure flows in the HRA alongside the rent setting proposals. That we've also scheduled that in, so that will come here first on the 10th of January. It'll go to Cabinet the following day on the 11th, and then that will go to Council on the 15th of January, and that will give the service good time to pull all the rent letters, notification letters together and make sure that we meet that 2-month requirement for notifying our tenants. So that's the first of just 2 slides. The second slide, I just wanted to draw out some of the key variations, mainly in 23-24 financial year. So this slide gives income and expenditure for the original budget in 23-4, the revised for 23-24, as well as the initial proposals that are being modelled for 24-25 financial year. There are some expenditure pressures being experienced in 23-24, those around premises costs, some employment costs, and also costs of revenue repairs. At the moment, though, those are offset by a review of the bad and doubtful debts in place. And the work that's been done on those is that we won't require the full budget in that area. So pressures and broadly being balanced out at the moment. I think one of the things when you do see these accounts each year are there some significant movements on that capital expenditure revenue account line. That's where the elements of the capital programme are being funded from revenue. So we will see some fairly hefty movements in that from time to time, depending on the timing and the progress made in the capital programme. So where you see some slippage in the programme, there'll be less demand on that, and you'll see reserves go up rather, and the reverse if schemes are brought forward. Overall, though, we're maintaining that HRA balances stay within our sort of policy guideline of not being less than about £1 million. At the moment, there is, if all the schemes in the capital programme came through, reserve would be broadly in line with that policy. As you see, when we'll come to the capital monitoring report shortly, the HRA capital programme is making good progress at the half-year stage. But what we've seen as a council is the ongoing challenges in delivering capital programmes, and it wouldn't be extraordinary to see some slippage before the end of the year and actually less pressure on those reserves than we're seeing in this report. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Nothing from you, Laura? No? Okay. Do committee have any questions or comments they would wish to pass back?
Oh, we've got a couple of,
I can't see anything on this screen.
What's gone on?
The screen's gone off, yes.
Oh, sorry, Chair. We've got Councillor Lloyd Selby.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Councillor Lloyd Selby, Councillor Haynes, Councillor Campbell. Try Councillor Lloyd Selby
Yes.
first, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Lloyd Selby, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt, for taking us through the key issues from that report. So my question relates to point 2.15, page 8 on the report. So reference is made to a 6.7%, which is obviously the Welsh Government cap, would equate to an increase of £7.65 a week. And I understand that the assumed increase in the Vale is 5.5%, but unless I've missed it, I can't see what that 5.5% increase would equate to in terms of weekly amount. Are you able to let us know that, Matt, or could you provide it subsequently for us?
I'm slightly disadvantaged because I've got the presentation in front of me and not the papers. I do recall that we've only quoted the one number, so I'll put round a note to committee members just setting out what the weekly increase would be at both 5.5% that's modelled in the papers this evening and the 6.7%, which is the capped Welsh Government sum. So I'll put that round after the meeting for everyone.
And if I may, just thank you. And if I may, just one quick follow-up question. So rental increase for 24-25 is currently assumed at 5.5%. When is that likely to be confirmed?
So that will come forward in the HRA report just after Christmas. So it'll come here for initial review on the 10th of January before it goes to Cabinet on the 11th and then on to Council the following week. So imminently, and I know colleagues are working finance colleagues are working closely with Mike Ingram and his colleagues on that report at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies, we seem to be having some technical difficulties here. My screen in front of me has gone dead, so I'm relying on Mark. Councillor Haynes, if you'd like to come in, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt. If I could take you, Matt, to 2.4, bullet point 1. There's reference to savings. Hang on, it's very, like you and everyone else, I'm having to jump between screens here. If I may. Employee costs, not savings. Employee costs are anticipated to be 54k due to budgeted current proposals for pay and other staff changes. I wonder if I could have a bit of clarification on the other staff changes.
Apologies, Councillor Haynes. I don't have that full detail in front of me this evening. I'm not sure whether Mike Ingram can help out on that question. Otherwise, we'll drop you a line after the meeting.
But that'll be fine. Just if I may ask another one, which is bullet point 4 in the same section. It makes references to court costs reduced due to legal reasons. Obviously, the laws change, and you've also managed to decrease rent arrears, which I think that's counterintuitive, to be honest with me. But I take my hat off you if that's true. If I've read that correctly, is that correct? What it says, that the rent arrears have been reduced?
Yeah, that's what the report is saying. Again, I can't pull the report up at the moment, but there is quite a close relationship between arrears and court costs, and we will also see this in the realms of council tax collection as well, where you do go to court to recover costs, arrears. There are court costs charged that come back to the council. Naturally, that's a really difficult area to forecast, and you'll see some volatility in there during the course of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, I believe you want to come in on that.
Can everyone hear and see me?
Yes, Mike, we can.
Thank you. Just to pick up on a couple of the points that have been raised. In terms of evictions and court costs, that's directly as a result of an agreement that we have with Welsh Government related to annual rent increases that we've signed up to. All local authorities and RSLs in Wales have signed up to that agreement. In terms of the point in relation to rent arrears, members will be aware, and it probably reflects on the cost issue relating to staffing. We'd indicated previously a desire to increase the number of staff in our income recovery team, which we are in the process of doing as we speak, and we've employed 2 additional staff into the rent arrears income recovery team. And what you are seeing is obviously potentially the impact of those additional resources and capacity within the team to better manage our response. Equally, our income team, money advice team have been working extremely hard in ensuring that people that are finding income pressures on their finances, that we're able to work with our tenants to increase their income, whether that be in the form of welfare benefits or in the form of grants or other income streams. And again, I think it's a testament to the hard work of the team at the moment, given the difficulties our tenants are currently facing in relation to working with our tenants to to come to agreeable solutions in terms of managing their rental income.
Councillor Campbell, if you'd like to come in, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So I just have 2 points that I'd like to ask, if that's okay. In 2.2 of the report, it mentions 140,000 for a land sale. I'm just wondering what that is. And the second point that I'd like to raise as well is voids. How many voids do we actually have in the Vale of Glamorgan at the moment? And does this have a knock-on to our housing revenue?
Apologies, I'm going to have to defer to Mike Ingram on both of those questions. Apologies for that.
In terms of the can people hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. In terms of the land sale, I've just opened up the report. Could you explain where that is in? Did you say 2.4?
It's in 2.2. There's a table 2.2, HRA funding. It's in the 2023 to 2024 land sale. It's about the 5th line down, 140,000 in revenue. On the total expenditure, sorry, 140,000 land sale.
Yeah, so that is likely to be land purchase rather than us selling land. So that will be expenditure on a land purchase, I believe. And sorry, I've missed your second point. You had a second point. Sorry.
Yeah, voids. So how many voids do we actually have in the Vale of Glamorgan at the moment? And then obviously that would have a knock-on effect to the housing revenue. And then there would be potentially a knock-on to the turnaround of those as well. So we would have the knock-on, obviously, on the getting the goods and things. And we've seen the knock-on with building and such from the backlash on COVID and things like that. So I was just wondering how many voids we have in the Vale of Glamorgan, and if we have the access on the turning around times and things like that, and just where we are in regards to that.
Okay, so in terms of voids, there's probably around 220 voids, properties that become available during the year. We classify voids as minor and major works. In terms of minor works, those would be properties that are turned around in the 20 or so days that our performance reports indicate. In terms of long-term voids, which might be what you're referring to, so properties which are empty and have been empty for quite some time, a long time, or where we have no immediate plans, we've got very few of those, perhaps 2 or 3 properties at the moment. We're going through, in terms of those properties, we will be going through an appraisal system as to whether there is a viability argument as to whether we invest in those or we don't. So these will be properties where we've estimated perhaps works in excess of £50,000 or £60,000 because of substantial structural repairs, or the type of property, if they're non-traditional type sort of buildings, which would be impossible to bring up to WHQS. But we're probably only talking about 3 or 4 of those properties off the top of my head. I can provide you with a definitive list outside of the meeting, but just to reassure members, we don't have an issue with void properties and not being able to let any of our void properties.
Thank you, Mike. Nick, I believe you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to offer to sort of help Mike out with some of the detail there, because I'm perhaps a little bit closer to this than he. And as of today, I'd have to, as Mike says, go and check that. But fairly recently, I ran a void report, and we had 35 voids at that point in time. So some of those are long-term voyages, are subject to major works, structural works, significant sort of works that are let on a contract and take some time. But the remainder of those are properties which we would call standard lets. So they're properties being repaired or under offer, waiting for the person to move in. So the majority of those, they're not sitting there empty. We don't have a problem, as Mike said, with empty properties, and there's huge demands, as we know, for empty homes. And when we re-let them, just to give members a bit of a gauge, really, it takes on average 22 days to repair and to re-let the property. So properties don't hang around empty for any length of time. But due to the fact that at any point there will always be a number of properties subject to repairs, both major and minor repairs, we're normally carrying about 35 properties out of all of our stock.
Thank you, Nick. Are you happy with that, Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody else wishing to speak on agenda item number 4? Oh, Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, I think this is probably more for Mike. Mike, on the court costs, how many current cases do we have going on?
So I think I mentioned there's a moratorium in relation to us taking legal action for evictions, which is part of the agreement with regard to the rent increases that we have with Welsh Government. We've agreed that we will not evict into homelessness, and we will work with households to try and recover that position. There are a number of individuals that we might, without that moratorium in place, we may have taken to court. But as I say, at this stage, because clearly an eviction for us is a failure of the process and of the system, clearly we don't want to evict anybody. We don't want to evict our vulnerable households and that would have few alternatives. So in terms of numbers, how many we would have in a previous year, we were probably talking around 50 or 60 cases that we might take to court in a year. Of those 50 and 60 cases, we were probably in an average year, we might get to an eviction stage of 3 or 4 of those cases. It is very difficult at the moment. What we saw during COVID and subsequently with cost of living, clearly a number of people had exited the job market at that stage for a variety of reasons. Many of our tenants were then moved on to having to claim in the form of universal credit. And part of the issue which we still have is obviously most claimants don't receive their first payments until 5 weeks after the claim, in which case tenants are not in a position to pay the rent in advance as we require in our occupation contracts. And we then work with the tenants over a period of time to try and get back in advance. But ultimately, a number of those tenants we will find are paying 5 weeks in arrears or 4 weeks in arrears rather than 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks in advance, which has contributed obviously to some of the arrears levels that we have had.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak? Okay, I don't see any more hands up. The recommendations for this are that the revised budget and initial proposals be submitted to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee for consideration, and that any comments we make are passed on to Corporate Performances and Resources Scrutiny as the lead Scrutiny Committee. Are we happy with those recommendations?
Happy with those recommendations.
Sorry, Chair, just to confirm with yourself and the committee, are there any comments to go back to Cabinet? If not, are yourself and committee happy to note the report?
I didn't hear any specific comments, but I am willing to open up the floor if I misunderstood anything. Okay, are we happy to move and note?
Happy to move and note.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 5 is the refresher medium-term financial plan 2023 to 24 to 28 to 29. And again, this is Matt or Laura.
This is me again,
Okay,
and there's 2 or 3 slides to accompany what
Okay.
I'm about to say. That's all right. So I guess for a lot of us, it's a really long process setting the budget. If you look to this cycle and back to March when we approved the existing budget and 5-year medium-term financial plan, we pretty much started work on the 24-25 budget the following couple of weeks. Perhaps most due to the pay awards coming in quite late and changing all our assumptions very quickly. So we'd have worked over the spring to start revising those assumptions and looking at how we were going to approach the budget for 24-5. And following that, we brought to you to Cabinet in July, that was subject to scrutiny, our financial strategy for setting the 24-5 budget and setting out the Council's medium-term financial plan for the 5 years from 2024-5. We then, over the course of the summer, with a target date of end of September, started to review those pressures. And as you'll have seen in the revenue monitoring that you've had here before, and we're going to discuss in a moment, a huge amount of pressure coming through in the council, predominantly in social care areas, but also in continuing in homelessness and housing. So we've spent the late summer revising our cost assumptions, and we brought those in this report that came forward to Cabinet on the 16th of November, a little bit later than we'd ordinarily planned to do. Then the last couple of points in the cycle then, and that's the work we're currently undertaking, is the formulation of savings, further review of the cost pressures as well, and reviewing our assumptions around funding, not in the least as a consequence of the UK budget setting and the Welsh Government settlement later in December. We'll then, similar to last year, we'll go out to consultation with communities on that to the start of January, and there'll be an opportunity for this committee to comment on the assumptions we're making and the savings proposals that we're bringing forward at that time, relevant to your work programme. We've stuck with the principles underpinning our financial strategy from 22-3 budget setting and those that were underpinning the 23-4 budget. It's really challenging at the moment. The budget isn't for its own self, it's there to deliver the corporate plan, and we've got to, as hard as everything is, we've got to try and keep that in the forefront of our minds. And the focus has been on protecting those services that support the most vulnerable in our communities, and we continue with that aspiration. It's quite easy to be sidelined when it's such a tough job managing to balance 1 year budget, but we're trying to look across the medium term financial horizon in everything that we do. I'll talk a little bit about reserves shortly, and they're really important at this time of uncertainty. Council tax is a third of our main revenue streams, government grant being the other 2/3, so that plays an important part in our considerations. Fees and charges, it's tough out there at the moment with the cost of living, but for discretionary charges we've continued to push forward that we need to be raising them in line with inflation and the costs that we're actually experiencing. We've continued to put forward that managing the finances is a collective responsibility, and we certainly see that through Cabinet and leadership team, but also in the contribution that the scrutiny committees make in scrutinising our proposals and engaging in the whole budget setting process. We also, and part of the reason why we're here this evening, we really genuinely believe in having accessible and transparent finances. I'm always open to comments about how we can make our reports more readable and easy to understand and comprehend, good, accessible and transparent finances are really at the heart of decent decision making. And all in all, with all that, we're trying to deliver best value and make sure that we're procuring and commissioning services in the most efficient way possible as well. That said, this slide, which is pretty much lifted from the report, sums up really how very, very challenging the finances are for 24/5 and across the medium term. If I just briefly talk about the funding side of this at the top half of the chart table to start with, we're modelling government grant increasing by 3% for 24/5. So every 1% of increased government grant is £2 million, so really important to our funding. We had a 2-year settlement in March, so this is year 2 of that settlement. In the past, and certainly last year is a good example, where perhaps at this time of the year we were setting out how nigh on impossible it was to set a budget. We had quite an amazing settlement late on from Welsh Government of 7.9%. We're really not expecting anything similar this year. You'll have all seen in the media the challenging position the UK economy's in, rising interest rates, prolonged inflation, and absolutely no growth. And those ingredients don't really serve funding of public sector at all well. And we'll have also seen in the Chancellor's budget last month, whilst there was some headroom because of increased revenues that he's seeing because of the inflation on wages, that has been directed to reducing national insurance from the 1st of January by 2%. No mention really of public sector in his announcement, neither local government or health for that matter. So tough times ahead, I think. We do, because of population movements, typically do better than the Welsh average. So I'd expect 3% to be a touch higher, but I'm thinking 3.3, 3.4%, not anything astronomical. We're modelling council tax at 5% at the moment. That's an increase in what we had in the financial strategy in July when it was 4%. There is going to be pressure for that to increase, doubtless, when you look at the pressures that are stacking up in the bottom half of this table. Really difficult looking forward. Obviously, we've had the majority of the current financial year with inflation in and around 8-9%, albeit that in September, as we've just seen in the housing revenue account report, it's went down to 6.7 and is currently down at 4.8. So it's going to be possibly reducing still further in the early in the new calendar year at the time that we'll be setting our council tax. Just quickly at the bottom of the table, the current overall gap is £10.5 million, and that's driven by exceptional cost pressures that we're experiencing at the moment. The 20.8 million, the line above, is after considerable amount of intervention by officers attempting to address the underlying pressures that we have there, £38 million. And in the report, we have set out at a high level those that we've not been able to take forward at this time. So, for example, we're not going to be able to fully fund pay awards, so we've only put 3% aside for those when they're likely to be coming through at 5 and 6%. And those are effectively hidden efficiencies on services. Services are going to have to manage within lesser budgets. There are a huge amount of pressures coming through from schools, certainly demographic pressures around additional learning needs. We're not able to fund all of those. That put more pressure on school budgets. Some of the directors will find that none of their pressures can be taken forward in the budget, and those are the Director of Corporate Services, Place and Environment and Housing, albeit that the featuring in that £20.8 million is £1.5 million of pressure on homelessness. As per last year, we'll continue to smooth that out with reserves whilst the housing strategy comes to fruition and attempts to deliver more capacity across the council. Equally, whilst we're trying to protect the front line as well, social care, massive increases in volume and complexity and price, and those are the real pressures on the council at the moment. And doubtless the Director of Social Services and his colleagues can have some really tough discussions with providers when they come to negotiate fees for the 1st of April. So a really very, very tough financial position that we're experiencing across the whole of the council at the moment. Just briefly then, the next steps, I've talked about the UK government budget. That's pretty late on in the year, isn't it, when you're trying to set the budget. Traditionally called the autumn statement. It's just slipped in by a matter of days, isn't it? The Welsh Government settlement then, not much turnaround for the Welsh Government to pull their settlement together. That's the 19th of December. I will skip the HRA a moment, but we're aiming to put a budget out for consultation at Cabinet on the 18th of January. We'll essentially need to have a first draft of that report by the 28th of December. So that's going to put quite a bit of pressure on. That'll then go out for consultation to the public for 4 weeks, and it will also come to all the scrutiny committees for review. We talked about the 15th of January council, so the HRA rent setting is brought together with the HRA business plan, and we'll go to council on the 15th. In terms of the council's overall budget, that will go to Cabinet for a draft budget on the 29th of February to recommend onto council early March, the final budget for the council. So that's just some highlights from the medium-term financial plan refresh. Obviously, as I've just said, the main concern for this scrutiny committee is the housing component of that and the pressure we're experiencing on homelessness in particular. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Anything from you, Laura? No? Okay. Do we have anybody wanting to speak on that item? I see no hands waiting. No. Councillor Lloyd Selby has just come in. Yes, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, a couple of comments and a question. So first of all, thank you, Matt, and thank you to all the officers for providing such clarity around the very difficult position that the council finds itself in terms of financial pressures. And clearly there are tough decisions which are having to be made and tough decisions ahead of us, no doubt. One of the things that's helpfully set out in the report is some of the steps that are going to have to be taken to address that situation. So section 2.66 talks about the council needing to review income raised from current activity. 2.67 talks about consideration needing to be given to the structure and combination of services to leverage the most value. I understand that these are complex issues which officers are looking at. I think it would be helpful to understand more about the timescales for those issues being looked at. When might that have an impact in terms of the final budget position? And then I've got one specific question, which I suspect is probably for Mike. I note in Appendix A, and Matt has already made reference to it, the pressure on budget as a result of the cost of breakfast accommodation to address homelessness. And I think it would be helpful for us to understand whether you anticipate the pressure on that will continue upwards or potentially will stabilise or indeed might actually improve. Thank you.
I can take those first couple of questions about income and service structure. Much the same as in 23-24 budget setting, we've been saying to colleagues, not only must you look to increase fees and charges in line with inflation, but primarily you at least need to make sure if you're delivering a discretionary service that those fees and charges are actually covering the full cost of delivering that service. and if not, you need to increase the fees or make a conscious decision to have concessions against the full fee. The structure of service can mean a myriad of things. I guess at one extreme it can mean cessation of a service, but that work has already commenced. We've had a series of budget working groups with all of the directorates looking at what the art of the possible is. Needless to say, we've got some way to go when we're looking at a gap the size of £10.5 million, albeit I would say there are some strategies already in place to reduce that. The council's tax base, so the number of residents we charge council tax to, is increasing. The recovery rates that we're seeing on council tax are increasing to levels that we were seeing pre-pandemic. We're reviewing our borrowing costs, the interest we earn on our investments on our reserves, and we also did have some year 2 savings that we're validating. So all in all, those would drop the gap to about £7.5 million, but that's still a huge sum of money. The challenge, and I probably set it out when I mentioned the deadline for getting that draft budget together on the 28th of December. We need to have a package of proposals together to balance the budget at that stage. Some of those proposals will be worked up in less detail than others, and we'll continue to be working on those through to the final budget, the draft budget to Cabinet on the 29th of February. What we are seeking to do, and that's also a difficult task as you're developing these proposals, we are looking to have quality impact assessments in place for all of them when we come out to the budget for consultation, so that we have meaningful consultation and both scrutiny and residents are quite clear on the impact of the proposals and what impact there might be on them. And as you suggest, Councillor, probably need Mike for the second half of your question.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd-Selby. No, the situation hasn't plateaued and isn't plateauing. I think you'll see from one of the later reports, the ADP Q2 report, at the end of Q1, we had 331 households in temporary accommodation, and at the end of Q2, that figure had risen to 351. In terms of hotel accommodation and bed and breakfast accommodation specifically, those pressures continue, even with some of the new build RSL activity that has come on stream in the last 12 months. As we are moving people through temporary accommodation, people are joining and people are joining in larger numbers. So we're some way away, I think, from a position where we might see a plateau. So in terms of activity at the moment, some of the things that we're doing, we're looking currently to source cheaper alternative temporary accommodation than that we currently use, to try and reduce some of the financial pressure on the hotel bed and breakfast budget, which Matt has referred to. We are speaking to a number of providers at the moment. We, as others, are looking not necessarily just within the local authority boundary, but we're also now looking outside of the local authority boundary for opportunities to expand, increase the amount of accommodation that might be available for us to address some of the duties, statutory duties that we have. As I say, that's not uncommon, and I know all speaking to colleague heads of service in other local authority areas, the pressure on local authorities is immense at the moment, and is not easing. There are some other measures that we're looking at. We're looking at some of our options in relation to shared accommodation within our own stock. We're looking at options in relation to running our own private leasing scheme to try and increase the supply of landlords that are prepared to work with us. We're liaising with colleagues in our regeneration service in relation to empty homes, and we're in negotiation at the moment with 3 landlord stroke owners who are prepared to consider selling properties to the local authority. That obviously we're trying to increase the stock in terms of looking at acquisition activity, and we're looking to prioritise some of our own developments to see whether we can push some of those over the line a bit more quickly. But I think there are pressures going forward. There's no indication at this stage from Welsh Government regarding any financial assistance in relation to temporary accommodation for next year. Members will be aware that we have been supported by Welsh Government over the last couple of years in terms of grant income. There's no indication of that at the moment. And the chair of the WLGA, the Housing Cabinet Member for Swansea, has written to Welsh Government asking for some flexibility around existing grant streams that could be diverted to temporary accommodation rather than some of the preventative activity, which is becoming increasingly difficult to do because we can't prevent at the moment as quickly as people are coming through the door and our pressures are on temporary accommodation. So there is a lot of work going on in the background to try and reduce some of those pressures, and we're having ongoing conversations as I say, of trying to limit as far as we can the pressure on the council finances.
Thank you, Mike. Oh, Colette Island, if you'd like to come in. Colette, could you put your camera on, please?
Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
my mistake. I pressed my hand in error. I do apologise.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
We saw Councillor Haynes had his hand up, but it's gone down. Are you still wanting to come in, Councillor Haynes?
So, to be honest, Mike has pretty much answered the question I was going to ask. So it'd be pointless to ask it again. So the question has been answered already. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is anybody else wishing to speak on this item? Nobody in the room? No? Okay. So thank you very much for that. The recommendations on that is that the report be referred to the Council Scrutiny Committees to review the work mitigating the cost pressures and for comments to be referred to Cabinet. Are we happy with that recommendation? I haven't really heard any specific comments. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mark.
I don't believe so, Chair, but if there aren't any comments, our committee is just happy to sort of note the report.
That was going to be my next question. Are we happy to move a note?
Happy to move a note.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 6, corporate safeguarding summary report. If you'd like to come in, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report of that was originally referred to Cabinet on the 16th of November. Members will be aware that I think it was just a couple of meetings ago that you will have seen the full year report regarding corporate safeguarding. And this is just a very brief summary report, just an update in terms of activities following that report in the last period of time. I won't go through the detail of the report in terms of background. I think members are acutely aware now of the council's responsibilities and individual responsibilities in relation to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. Key issues in the report for consideration, as say, are those things that and the activity that's been undertaken since the annual report, and they're highlighted in section 2.1. And very briefly, we now have, as a council and as a corporate safeguarding group, a suite of monitoring data, dashboard data that we're now able to see, to look at trends and to look at outputs. Very much a can opener. So we're very much sighted now on issues before they arise or before they become major problems. And we're able to obviously, as I say, as a can opener, able to delve much more deeply in some of those areas. Our safeguarding training and materials have been improved and completed, as you can see. And as members will be aware, our key mechanism for training is our IDEV system. We are mindful, however, not every member of staff in the council has access to IDEV, and certainly I'm acutely aware in terms of our frontline staff that a separate package of training will be required and has been provided in the past, certainly for my building maintenance staff. Toolbox, what we would call toolbox type training, where we provide that training bespoke and face-to-face. We've developed arrangements in relation to response to audits and quality assurance, and we now have a working group who are specifically focused on that area of work. And the final point, obviously, our local authority designated officer supports us in the work of the corporate safeguarding group, of which I'm a member. Moving on, in terms of corporate leadership and accountability, as you can see from the report, we've recently been updating our online activity in terms of the safeguarding pages on the council StaffNet system. In terms of corporate policy, we're updating our corporate safeguarding policy. That's currently in a draft format and is expected to be in place early next year in January. In terms of scrutiny and assurance, as I've mentioned, we've now taken a more in-depth focus looking at some of the outcomes from some of the reviews and reports that we've seen. And though not mentioned here, the members will be aware that there is a regional safeguarding board which operates between ourselves and Cardiff, looking at adults and children's safeguarding measures. And the council will be introducing and has introduced a new local safeguarding group within the council, so that some of those regional discussions are felt much more focused within a Vale scene. In terms of safer recruitment, pleased to be able to say we are compliant with our safer recruitment policy, and we continue to monitor that, and compliance is exceptionally high at this time. And finally, training volunteers. Members of this committee will have gone through obviously some mandatory training and some of the work that we've been doing in relation to DBS checks. We've been doing some work, or colleagues in our education safeguarding team have also been doing some work with schools and governors training as well. And as a corporate safeguarding group, we've provided some oversight and suggested areas of development there. I don't intend to dwell any further. As I say, it's very much a summary report of activity following the annual report, which you saw a couple of months ago. And it's just, as I say, just as I understand it, so that you have oversight and noting of the activity ongoing at the moment.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have anybody wishing to speak on this? Councillor Campbell, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question? Safeguarding training for school governors. It's recommended that governors undertake safeguarding training. It's not mandatory training. I was just wondering if this is something that the local authority put forward, or if this was like something put forward by the Welsh Government, because I believe that safeguarding training for governors should be mandatory, not recommended. I was just wondering if that came from the local authority, or if that came from higher.
Councillor Campbell, interestingly, it was a focus in our last corporate safeguards group meeting a few weeks ago, and this topic came up. So it's an area that we're looking at as a group. We understand the issues relating to the regulatory performance and mandate and otherwise. Our view as a group is, why wouldn't governors wish to undertake safeguarding training to protect themselves, their schools and their children? It's an area of activity that we are looking at. I know Councillor Williams, Councillor Eddie Williams, who's the chair of our corporate, a member of the corporate safeguarding group, spoke very well at that recent meeting. So it is an area of concern for us, and it's an area that we continue to work with school governing bodies to get to a position where, even if it's not mandatory, the governors will take up the offer of that support and that training, as I say, to protect themselves as a governor group, their children and their staff.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. I see no other hands up on screen. Is there anybody in the room who would like? Oh, Councillor Payne has just put her hand up. Come on in, Helen. If you'd like to switch your camera on, please. Councillor Payne, if you could please put your camera on. I don't know if you're speaking because we can't hear you either. Okay. Councillor Payne, can you please make sure you don't have your Teams open, and also then press the request to speak button again. Thank you. We still can't see you, Councillor Payne. And we can't hear you either. Mark?
Hi, Councillor Payne. Just wondering if you can just make sure that your microphone icon is not clicked off, and the camera icon, if you can just click those just to make sure. Can you hear us, Councillor Payne?
I think we've lost her again. Councillor Payne, are you connected to your VPN? If you are, please can you connect just to your Wi-Fi, not the VPN?
Just to say, Councillor Payne, if you do that, you might have to rejoin the meeting. So obviously, if you need to do that, you can come back with a question later on. Oh, thanks, Councillor.
Okay, while we're... Sorry, go on.
Hi, Councillor Payne. I can see you've rejoined. Are you able to press your request to speak again?
Yeah. Councillor Payne, if you'd like to come in. We
Right, thank
see
you
you
very
and we
much.
can hear you.
Thank you. I rebooted it again. Thank you for that. My issue is around safeguarding and, specific to housing. So I know you said there's a new data set. So does that include specific referrals that come via housing exclusively?
Yes, so Councillor Payne, the annual report, as I say, it's a few months ago now, I know it came to this committee.
Okay.
Within the body of the report, each of the directorates of the council is highlighted in a separate section, and within that section of the report, there is one for environment and housing, which housing forms part of that directorate. Within there was a list of statistical information relating to how many referrals and from where within my service those referrals came.
Yep.
The majority come through the homelessness route. I can't remember the figure off the top of my head. The majority come through the homelessness route, and any family or vulnerable person that goes into temporary accommodation is automatically referred regardless. Specifically, concerns around some of the temporary accommodation arrangements and wanting to assure ourselves that people are safeguarded in our temporary accommodation that we provide to them. So yes, that information is collated, and as I say, I'm happy to dig out the reference to housing from the report previously, and perhaps myself and Mark can send you some statistical information specifically relating to us.
Lovely, thanks.
Thank you. Mark, did you want to say something on that?
No, just to come in on Mike's point, between myself and Mike, we'll get that information out to yourself, Councillor Payne, and committee members.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? I see no hands in the room either. Okay, the recommendation for that is that the report be referred to scrutiny committees for consideration, for comment and for noting. Again, I didn't really hear any specific comments, so our committee happy to move a note.
Happy to move a note.
Thank you. Agenda item 7 is the capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to 3rd. To Matt and Laura.
Thank you very much. So we're going to share this one, you'll be glad to hear. So I'm just going to give the high-level council overview, and then Laura's going to say a few words that are more pertinent to this committee's remit. So I think the first thing to emphasise is that this extremely ambitious capital programme this year, the approved programme is £129 million. And you'll have seen from previous years how difficult it is to deliver a programme of that size, especially again in the economic environment that we're operating in, with rising costs and challenges over supply. And some of those issues that we were highlighting last year are still persisting. At the moment, the forecast is £107 million. So we are slipping some money forward or resources forward into the 2024-5 capital programme. And over the course of the rest of the autumn and into the new year, we'll be reviewing the 2024-5 five-year capital programme. So we'll be looking at schemes in the initial year of that programme to reschedule those as appropriate as well. Not atypical of any year, but I would expect some further slippage during the remainder of the year as colleagues continue to strive to deliver those programmes of works. That said, actual spend is at £26 million this year, so a bit more progress than we perhaps saw with the capital programme at a similar time last year, but quite a lot to see through still. The council, and this links in with the last couple of reports we had on the revenue side of things. The council is experiencing significant pressures in year on its revenue budget, and we at SLT and with cabinet members have had a strategy to actually preserve our reserves and make sure that they're there to be able to meet those risks we're experiencing in the medium term. So we've had a review of the capital programme over the late summer and early autumn, and reviewed those schemes that are predominantly reliant on council resources, so those that aren't grant funded and those that haven't yet commenced and that we're not entered into contractual commitments on. That review has freed up £5.5 million from a number of different sources, reserves, capital receipts, general capital funding, borrowing and revenue contributions to capital. So that's been a really thorough piece of work and really essential to the council's overall financial health. We're going to now move on to some committee-specific elements of the capital programme. So I'm just going to hand over to Laura and just to start off with the element of this committee's remit that falls into that review. Oh no, you need that one, otherwise you won't have the camera on your side.
Hello, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so within the remit of the Homes Committee, Homes and Safe Communities, of that £5.5 million that Matt has just outlined that has been released from this year's capital programme, 700,000 of it relates to the private housing budget of disabled facilities grants. So £700,000 has been uncommitted from this year and released into reserves for funding elsewhere. It's not going to be a surprise to this committee because I've mentioned a few times this year that the disabled facilities grants are slow moving, so there's an impact on capital, and similarly I'll mention soon in revenue, the fee income on the other side is also down because of that. So that is the one element. On the next slide. So I've pulled out from, I think it's Appendix 2, I've pulled out a summary of the capital budget for this committee. Obviously, the vast majority, the total is an approved programme of 56.5 million, 53.7 million of which is the housing improvement programme, unsurprisingly. So the top line is housing improvement programme within the HRA, but the full breakdown of that 53 million is shown in Appendix 1. There's a request to slip £3.8 million on the housing improvement programme, which is due to delays in procurement issues and delays on site appropriation and team resourcing, not having the capacity to actually progress some of the schemes. On the HRA, community safety, we've got a £44,000 target hardening grant for equipment for domestic abuse victims, and that's due to be fully spent. Empty homes grant, £931,000. Again, that's the majority of that is grant funded with an element of match funding from council, but I'm told that that is likely to slip. It's being reprofiled over 3 years, so an element of that is likely to slip forward probably in the next report, in the Q3 report. Private sector housing enable grant, 242,000 being forecast as a full spend by year end, and grants are going out of the door. And there's the disabled facilities grants, as I say, I've just mentioned. The approved budget is 1.5 million. Projected outturn is just 400,000 because of the issues they're having, so it's quite a drop there. So the variance of 1.131 million there, 700 of which is slipping, is being uncommitted from the budget, and the rest is slipping through to next year to 24-25. I think the next slide is just literally relating to the new build slippage that I just mentioned of 3.8 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Matt. Do we have anybody wishing to speak on this? Councillor Haynes, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm a little bit concerned about the slippage on the disabled facilities grant. I wonder if you can give me some assurance that this isn't due to low take-up. If I remember rightly, the rules changed recently, and I wonder if that had any effect on people wanting to take the grants on.
There is demand for disabled facilities grants. The challenge that the team is having is commissioning contractors to do the work, and that's a challenge that's existed for some time. And they are doing their utmost to obviously spend this money and the investment that comes alongside it. And certainly for the council, really important in terms of supporting those in social care as well.
Thank you. And a couple other points, if I may, Chair.
Of course.
Just a quick one, and I know you probably won't be able to answer this, so please feel free to write to me. The St Athan Community Centre, as we call it, the Paul Lewis Centre, that extra 4,000. I wondered if you can clarify what that was. I'll move on to the other point as well.
Yeah, neither Laura and I are able to answer that this evening. I'm not sure if that's something that Mike would have to hand. Otherwise, as per your suggestion, we'll need to drop your line outside of the meeting.
Yeah. And finally, moving on to the Landau point, which is I'll have to check, 2.37. I assume that's the Landau replacement. This seems to be going on forever. Are we anywhere near finding a replacement site?
Again, I think that might be something that Mike would be able to help you with. I'll bring Mike in now.
Sorry, Councillor Haynes, unfortunately I can't help you directly insofar as neither of those capital programmes are areas that I'm aware of specifically, but I will report back to the Emma, who's the head of service that is responsible for those areas, and we will get members an update in terms of those two questions that you've raised.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. And thank you, Chair.
Just to let you know, Councillor Haynes, the Environment and Regeneration Committee might be the better committee to bring the Landau question to. Feel free to contact their chair. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Sorry for slipping off.
Not a problem. It can be confusing who has what under them sometimes. Yeah. So
and I am quite new. So. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else wishing to speak on that? Councillor Hennessy, if you'd like to come in.
Two things for Mike, this is more than likely for. Are you able to tell me if the Colcock Clinic project and the Eagleswell School housing development is on budget and on time, please?
Councillor Hennessy, I can confirm that both projects are progressing. They are both at the moment on time. And progressing to the budget estimates and the agreed tender prices that we previously agreed. The first units at Eagleswell arrived, the MMC units arrived back end of the week before last, and they will be arriving over the next few months, and the intention that the site will be ready for occupation from the beginning of April. The completion date of the Colcock Clinic, I can't remember off the top of my head, but in terms of the recent monitoring report that I've seen in terms of progress, Colcock Clinic was on track.
Okay. Would it be possible for this committee to have a visit of the Eagleswell development?
I think we've offered that opportunity in the past to members. As I say, the first units are arriving on site as we speak. And again, we'll arrange that. We'll confirm a date for members of the committee to go down to site to have a look at the accommodation. At the moment, clearly, there's a lot of craning going on at the moment. There's a lot of transporters that are coming up and down Port Road delivering these units. And we would need to coordinate that clearly then with the contractor But at the moment, they've arrived. They're currently, those that have arrived on site, first of all, are currently being connected, obviously, to supplies and services. But as I say, the site, in terms of full occupation, we won't be able to start occupying the site until beginning of April.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to come in? Okay, there is nobody else who'd like to speak on that. So we do have 3 recommendations here, and they're all that things be noted. Are we happy with the 3 recommendations and move a note?
Happy to move a note.
Can you say it again, just to make sure?
Happy to move a note.
Thank you. Agenda item 8 is the Q2 revenue monitoring 2023 to 2024. Again, I'll hand you over to Matt and Laura.
Aye, and we'll do the same as we did with the capital. So
Okay.
I'll give you a bit of the council level overview, and then we'll move on to some of the committee specifics. And I'll perhaps do my bit relatively quickly so we can concentrate on the important elements. So this continues the outline that we set at the end of the first quarter, and those pressures are continuing to come through on the council. And as you'll have seen from the earlier report, they're really influencing the budget in 2024-5 and across the medium term. So at the moment, and this is an increase from the £3 million or so that we saw at Q1, we're seeing a £6.768 million unplanned use of reserves, and that's predominantly in social services. Where, as I was saying, for the budget, we're seeing actually both in children's and adults, greater volumes coming through, greater complexity, and increase in cost as well. I also mentioned in the budget that the challenges that we're having with our schools. Prior to COVID, we were seeing school balances reducing significantly, only at about £1 or £2 million collectively. They increased significantly during COVID, up to a peak of £12 million. They reduced to 6 last year, and they've reduced by £6 million further in the current financial year. So significant pressure on schools at the moment. One thing we've done, and again with a view to transparency in this report, so that colleagues can really understand the full costs of individual directorate services and their controllable budgets, we've stripped out corporate recharges, and I'm sure that will help in reading the reports. The report also sets out some of the steps that have been taken in year to mitigate those emerging overspends. That just repeats a couple of the words that I've already said, actually. Yes, social services the real main pressure point, but we're also seeing pressures in education with additional learning needs, and also school transport, highways maintenance. There are some mitigations at a corporate level, so there are underspends against borrowing, and some of that we're taking forward into the budget next year. And also there's an in-year council tax surplus. That's quite difficult to forecast, but we did see relatively, for this council, relatively lower levels of council tax recovery last year, and we are seeing that money being collected now, so that's a real positive. Also positive in some of this gloom, I guess, is there was quite a significant savings programme for the council last year after a couple of years of quite reasonable settlements from Welsh Government. So we've had a £7.5 million savings programme. Some of that's efficiencies in schools. The remaining is the £4.6 million efficiencies against service budgets, and at the half-year point, 80% of that's being delivered. So good progress on that. Just a quick couple of words on reserves, and this follows some of the narrative and discussions that we were having last year. They can only be used once, and once they've used, they're gone. We do have really healthy reserves, but a large proportion of them have been targeted and committed to delivering the capital programme, both at a service level and for the HRA, as we've just seen. So there's £29 million of support for the capital programme coming from the reserves. And there are some planned transfers that were built up into the budget, especially some of those smoothing out of pressures across the medium term, such as energy and homelessness. But the worrying column is that second column of numbers from the right and the unplanned and use of reserves. So the forecast reserves at year end are £57 million, significantly down from the 110 at the start of the year. We continue to hold our reserves for three key reasons: to fund council priorities, especially through the capital programme, to manage known risks, and these are especially around social services and pay at the moment. And then also we do have some ring-fenced reserves, so we need to hold those specifically. We do, and I guess there's a fourth one, we do hold some of our reserves for investment, and that, again, that's really important that we hold those to be able to transform our services over the medium term in the face of reducing government support. So we're just going to move on to 2 or 3 slides now, just pulling out the headlines in the monitoring report that are more specific to this committee. So I'll hand back over to Laura.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chair. Okay, so the next slide is forecast year-end position relating to this committee. So we've got youth offending service, budget of 768,000, projected outturn 624, so an underspend at year-end of £92,000. General fund housing at this stage expected to break even, albeit with a use of £45,000 planned use of reserves. Private housing, back again to disabled facilities grants. That one's looking as if it's going to be £92,000 overspent or over budget due to the lack of income, the fee income from the capital scheme. And that is going to be an unplanned use of reserves, beg your pardon, on top of a planned use of reserves of 42,000 to cover occupational therapists within the team. Both the housing revenue account, HRA, and regulatory services budgets are both expected to outturn on target at this stage. So then moving on to key pressures within those budgets. Again, private housing, disabled facility grant fee income is going to be estimated £92,000 down this year. Regulatory services, and I've made the note there that the pressures stated relate to the whole of the shared regulatory service, not necessarily purely the Vale budget. It's just the Vale budget that's the responsibility of this committee. And the two that have been highlighted are a pay award, which differs to the estimated budgeted figure, £30,000 short for the whole service. And they're also having issues with animal welfare investigation costs. So again, that an element of that could well come back to the Vale budget. Moving on then to general fund housing. This is where there's a list there of the separate pressures, but I think the first three relate to homelessness issues, which again are widely known within the committee. There's also assistance needed for refugees, Afghan and Ukraine support needed, IT technical support to assist a new IT implementation system, and also costs to deliver support to volunteers. for tenants within the Vale as well. So some fairly hefty pressures on the general fund housing revenue budget, unfortunately. And Matt mentioned the sort of top line story on the efficiencies for the authority, drilling down into those for this committee. We have general fund housing. There are 3 separate targets which are all on target to be reduced, and so the budgets have been reduced and the savings will be made. Private housing, again, disabled facilities grants, that the estimation was a £20,000 saving for that team, but obviously the issues they're having across the board, that's not going to be achieved this year. And regulatory services, there's £21,000 reduction already made from the Vale base budget towards the shared regulatory service, so that has been achieved. That's it, thank you.
Thank you both. Do we have anybody wishing to speak? We have no hands up online or in the room. So I will go straight to the recommendation. And the recommendation is that the position with regard to the authority's 2023-24 revenue budget be noted. Are we happy to move and note? Are we happy to move and note, guys?
Happy to move and note, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd-Selby. And I will thank Matt and Laura for coming in tonight. You are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but you are also free to leave if you wish. Thank you very much for all your help and advice tonight. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. It's been lovely to see you both in person. We will go to agenda item 9, the annual delivery plan monitoring report, quarter 2 performance 2023-24. If you'd like to take that, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note, first of all, for members, you will note a somewhat abridged version of our normal annual delivery plan monitoring report. And as is indicated in the report itself, there are some capacity challenges currently within our corporate performance team, and therefore I don't wish to call it a tomb, but obviously members that have seen the full report are acutely aware how much work goes into that report. And as I say, there's an abridged version that is being presented to members this evening. In terms of the report itself, it's our quarter 2 progress up to the end of September. And aligns with our commitments within our annual delivery plan for 23-24. There's an appendix attached to Appendix A, and that goes through a range of service measures that have been implemented through the ADP, then gives you an update in terms of activity. I think what I would probably say is Appendix A is a tale of two halves. Clearly, in terms of the activity that has been undertaken in challenging circumstances, is an indication of how much work is currently going on to deliver the annual plan. But equally, I think you'll notice from the last slide when we come to it that we are highlighting. And as Matt has highlighted in his earlier financial reports, we are highlighting some significant risks going forward that will need to be considered in our consideration of our annual delivery plan for 24-25. But if I can take members directly to the document itself, Appendix A, and if one of our Democratic colleagues could please share the report.
Yeah, my colleagues, Gareth Davis is going to share now, Mike. It should be coming on the screen.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you. So if I can take you to the first page of the report that members will already have had sight of themselves, and as I say, helpfully on the screen. In terms of areas that we've achieved, and I don't intend to pull out all of the achievements for all of the objectives, but just to highlight some of the work that's been happening in the quarter. Under Objective 1, working with our communities, we've received some really positive feedback regarding the Vale Tenants newsletter that was submitted, that was produced and distributed a few months ago. Just to let members know, we had hoped to send out a second newsletter just before Christmas, but unfortunately that's not been possible and is likely to be going out now in the beginning of January. On the same objective, just an update on the draft community safety strategy. That draft strategy is now complete and is due to go to Cabinet next week for consideration. Just to reassure members, community safety obviously is not just the responsibility of the local authority, it's the responsibility of a number of statutory partners, and that draft strategy is going through and has gone through their own internal governance arrangements, and is now ready for the council to adopt as our community safety strategy. Key change to that strategy: our previous strategy was a 3-year strategy, and this is now a 5-year strategy, and will be supported by an annual delivery plan, somewhat akin to the discussion that we had in relation to the ADP just a second ago. I know Helen Picton can't be with us on the call this evening, but one of her objectives under Objective 2 about, and I know there was some discussion previously, and Helen referred to this, around the development of a regulatory apprenticeship for Wales. Helen chairs that group, and she's provided an update which is indicating that they're almost at the level now. There's some final I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed in terms of the accreditation element of that apprenticeship scheme. But imminently, she's advised is imminent. Moving on to Objective 3, supporting people at home. We've received some additional funding, and I mentioned this, I think, at the last committee meeting, with regard to Safer Streets funding from the Home Office and through the PCC. That funding will enable us to look at some additional cameras, CCTV cameras. Members will also, I'm sure, be aware that our new cameras are all functioning, and the new CCTV service is actually running live at the moment. But this new funding will give us an opportunity to look at some additional cameras for some of our hotspots that may not be that well covered at the moment, and there's work ongoing to look at that at the moment. There's also some funding to provide some resource for some additional staffing to complement some of the visual, some of our activities with a much more visible presence in some of our hotspot areas. So we're looking at employing a couple of community safety officers that actually will be assisted with the PCSOs and with our colleagues in the police to actually attend at sites where there are problems in a preventative, as a preventative tool, rather than dealing necessarily when things have gone wrong, but basically to engage with young people or people causing antisocial behaviour, to do some of that early stage preventative work. Really important piece of work for us. We are a pilot authority in respect of that funding, and it'll be interesting to bring back to this committee some of the outcomes and outputs that we're able to achieve with that additional funding. I think there was an earlier report which talked around the £44,000 worth of funding for target harm.
Mike, I don't know if you're still there, but we seem to have lost you.
Bear with us, committee. We're just going to contact Mike now, see if he can rejoin.
Just to say, I also lost my connection, but I've managed to get straight back in. So hopefully others will be able to do the same.
It happened to me last night in the Healthy Living Scrutiny. It is a new system. There are going to be some teething problems until everybody gets used to it and bugs are ironed out. We just have to be patient, and I thank everybody for their patience tonight while we've had these technical difficulties.
I'm glad to know it wasn't just me, Chair. It's happened to me twice tonight.
Just let committee know we're just in contact with Mike now, hoping he'll be rejoining shortly. So bear with us a second.
We are still waiting for Mike to rejoin. Again, thank you for your patience. I feel like I should start talking about the weather now just to pass some time. It is very cold out there, isn't it? Yes. That's not good. Again, apologies for the delay. We are still trying to get hold of Mike. So if you could just continue to bear with us, thank you.
Chair, is the next agenda item Mike as well? Should we potentially move on and then maybe come back? Oh, he's back.
Apologies, technology. I'm
Not a
not sure how
problem.
far I got, to be honest with you, because I was reading off a report at the time. So I think Mark has just confirmed I got as far as somewhere around community safety.
Yes, you did.
Let me, as I say, if we move on to slide 6, Gareth, emerging areas of development and activity. Thank you. As we can see, sorry, I'm now reading off a larger screen rather than looking at the report, because I don't want to lose myself or lose myself to yourselves. So I was going to pick up some of the work there in terms of emerging activity. I think we've talked today around the support the council has given to the Ukrainian refugee response, and an area where clearly, you know, looking at the new accommodation that will be delivered on the Eagleswell site, developing the support and wraparound services that we'll be providing to those families when they arrive with us, those that are with us now and new arrivals that may be coming from other welcome centres in the coming months. In terms of support and learning, we've got a bit of an issue and a risk in terms of funding. As you can see there, for Value in the Vale, in previous years we've received grant funding from Public Health, and we're going through a bidding phase at the moment to continue to bid for that funding, and we will know shortly whether we've been successful in that. In saying that, we've also been making bids under the Sustainable Communities Budget grant stream as well. So all is not lost, but clearly the funding that we get from Public Health Wales is extremely valuable. In terms of supporting people at home, we're continuing to try and reduce the numbers of people in hotel accommodation, but as I say, that is extremely challenging at the moment. And Helen wanted me to reflect on the 2 Vale shared regulatory services cases. I think members may have seen those cases, certainly one of the cases on the news a few months ago. And Helen wanted me to flag that in those instances, the council was successful in following through in prosecution 2 cases. One related to Rogue Trader, an elderly couple in the Vale who'd engaged a plumber, a bathroom fitter. They knew the individual as a result of a family connection from some years previously. They paid that money up front, and unfortunately, the Rogue Trader, the plumber, did none of the work nor acquired any of the materials, as a result of which shared regulatory services, in terms of an outcome, were able to successfully prosecute. The other, I think, is probably familiar to people. There was an 83-year-old, and was an issue of illegal money lending. An 83-year-old lady who, again, the SRS and colleagues in the illegal money lending unit were able to successfully prosecute. In that instance, they did secure through the courts. They did secure a prison sentence, a suspended prison sentence for that case. And I think Helen just wanted to reflect on those 2, the amount of activity that goes on to deal with issues around scams, rogue traders, and obviously illegal money lenders. Moving on to the last slide, Gareth. And as I said, I think at the outset, it's a sort of tale of 2 halves, this report. So, you know, these are the emerging areas or the emerging risks that we're facing at the moment in this area. I won't dwell on this, and I think Matt has highlighted the issues that we face as a council, and particularly within the Environment and Housing Directorates, reductions in revenue, budgets impacting then obviously in some of the frontline services that we're going to be in a position to provide going forward. In terms of capital funding, again, I think Matt has raised that in an earlier report. In terms of objective 2, issues around pay and workforce planning disparity across between the council and other councils in the private sector. I mean, I see that specifically in our housing field at the moment, for example, where even in the local authority sector, if I take housing development as an example, so new build housing, I'm aware of colleagues at Andrew Freegard's level, who's our development manager, being paid consistently more in order to attract relevant, experienced and qualified staff. And I'm seeing that in other areas of housing activity as well. In terms of supporting people at home, shortage of land available for our future development programme. So we've got a land supply that we fed into the housing partnership for the next 5 years or so. But clearly, we need to continue in terms of finding more land for our future development and new build aspirations. And in terms of some of the migration and resettlement pressures are highlighted there. And again, I won't dwell on those. I think those are very well rehearsed at the moment locally and also nationally. In terms of objective 4, respect and enhance, we're talking there about being and managing expectations with reducing budgets and having transparent and honest conversations within our communities about what does that look like positively, what does that look like going forward, and highlighting that as a council that we are looking obviously to prioritise some key areas of resource and capacity and funding. And again, for my area, the vulnerable, obviously this council has committed to prioritising when it comes to actually looking at resources and resource allocation. So I think I'll leave it there. As I say, unfortunately, it's not the full report where we have the service plan and items that we go through. But as I say, really a flavour of where we are, and happy to take any questions on the appendix.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that. Before I open up the floor for questions, I actually have one myself. Could you give me an update on the Gypsy Traveller community at Hayes Road? What further engagement has there been? Any steps taken since we last discussed this at this committee?
In terms of the RDLP, there were no new sites that came forward from landowners that assisted us, I suppose, in this regard. We have and are having conversations internally with some new opportunities that have arisen. I wouldn't be at a point to sort of say where those land opportunities are at the moment, because we haven't entered into any negotiations or discussions in those sites. So there has been some movement in that there are a couple of sites that we feel might be suitable to take forward. In relation to the community at Hayes Road themselves, we are continuing to try and have dialogue with the group there. I think I spoke to Nick in the week. We've identified an individual who is looking to help us and support us in terms of trying to develop that communication with the group there, so that we can have a meaningful discussions about their long-term aspirations and the type of accommodation and site that they would wish to move to, which obviously was an issue that we discussed when we brought the Gypsy Traveller assessment to this committee a little while back. So there have been some improvements, and we are looking to improve those communication lines. And there are some initial conversations and discussions around some land opportunities, but as I say, they're probably a bit early at this moment to discuss in detail.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased that you may have found a mediator, so to speak. There is definitely a difficulty with engagement, and that could be down to many reasons, maybe a lack of trust. I don't really know, but I'm glad that you seem to have found someone to mediate. That will be a good step forward to take. Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask? Councillor Hanks, if you'd like to come in.
Councillor Hanks, are you right to try your request to speak button? Oh, there we are.
There we are, we
now.
have
Thanks,
you.
Councillor.
Sorry. Okay, thank you, Chair. Sorry, Mike. Could I possibly just have an update, please, on the progress of digital engagement with our residents? Are we seeing a higher percentage of people requesting help and feeding back to us? Is it going in the right direction? That was question one. Question two is, I suppose everybody is concerned about the future of the one-stop shop. I was involved in setting it up. I think it's been a huge asset to the vulnerable people in our society. And I just wondered if we could have a bit of a report back to the costs of it and the footfall, and how it's, you know, would we miss it greatly if this was a service that wasn't going to happen in the future due to cutbacks? I would be concerned about that. And the third one, I don't know if this is your remit, Mike, but report on the council diesel cars, the pool cars, how many cars we've got, how many are being swapped to EVs. I just wondered if there was something that we could, I don't ever seem to have seen or read anything about the number of cars we have and what percentage are being changed, and do we need as many today as we did before the pandemic? Thank you.
If I take the last point first, because it's the one I know least about, but I do know that there is a report due to come to council or to cabinet shortly with regard to EV. In terms of the figures that you asked for, what are the percentages? Sorry, I don't know. It's not an area. Again, it's under Emma's responsibility, but I will provide. I'll ask Emma to provide members with an update on the EV position regarding our pool cars and our fleet. In terms of the housing support grant, and specifically you referenced the pressure on, we reference in the report the pressure on the one-stop shop particularly, but it's a more general pressure across all of the commissioned housing support services that we provide, most of those are under contract. The budget for housing support grant, we welcome for the last two budget rounds the Welsh Government that the Minister has been able to not cut the budget, but it's not being increased neither in line with inflation. So in real terms, it is a cut for those organisations that are providing services, because of course they've had, as Matt has mentioned, they've had the same inflationary pressures that we faced in the last 12 to 18 months, staff pay, utilities costs, etc., etc. There is a campaign and a call at the moment to Welsh Government to protect the housing support grant budget in this year's consideration, Welsh Government's consideration of their budget this year. However, locally, we do know that some of our contract providers, our housing support contract providers, are saying to us they are finding it extremely difficult to deliver their contracts because of those pressures. I think in the report it indicates that we will review based on what we know the budget will be next year, once we've had Welsh Government confirmation of the HSG. We will review obviously what that impacts and what that means. in essence, it means we probably will support less people than we did the year before. And if it is a cut to the budget, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, I've not heard anything directly. If it is a cut to the budget, what does that impact then in terms of what we provide? I would agree wholeheartedly that the services that Pobble provide through the one-stop shop are fantastic. They're providing excellent outcomes in terms of our monitoring of the service. And of course, we direct significant numbers of our constituents and our residents and tenants through to that service to be provided with that triage and that first point of contact support when they may have issues in their current accommodation or if they're looking for new accommodation and what have you. I mean, I would be reluctant to cut the service. However, I have to be realistic. If that grant budget is cut significantly, we will not be able to afford all of the support services that we currently commission, and we will have to make some choices with regard to the ones that we prioritise and the ones that we don't. In relation to your last point, which was around your first point, sorry, which was around digital, obviously our digital in relation to council tenants is a priority to us, and we have the digital buddies, which is an internal group of volunteers supported by us in relation to providing training and opportunities for people to become digitally engaged. We run a number of those, and predominantly we've been more successful with some of our older residents in some of our sheltered housing schemes and wider, but also in terms of the training that we offer through the hub at Aberayron Close in Gibbonsdown, and also looking to widen that out into some of our community centres and opportunities there to sort of widen, as I say, the reach of the digital service. It is well supported. It is you know, in terms of residents. In terms of digital engagement across the council, I'm not particularly well cited. Clearly, we've adopted a new digital strategy as a council recently, and there are a number of work streams that are running from that. But it might be worth asking Tony at a future meeting to come forward to talk about some of the more corporate work around the digital work. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hennessy.
Hi, Mike. Just two questions. One, do you know what the percentage of residents have taken up our schemes, i.e. becoming members of the working groups and stuff like that?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not sure if Nick has got a view on that. I know that, for example, we've been doing a lot of work at the moment with the groups around the new tenant compact. And in fact, we've got a ceremony next week for the Vale Tenant Forum to sign the new compact document together with the chair of cabinet member for housing and myself. So we've got a celebration event next Thursday, I believe it is.
Yeah, on my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday! Which is a celebration of that activity as well. I mean, in terms of the numbers, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure of the numbers totally off the top of my head. In terms, we are looking to encourage and expand and increase the method of communication with our tenants away, in addition to our more traditional methods of engagement, and particularly using digital and ad hoc engagement with tenants, so that people feel that there are a number of avenues that they can actually provide us with their views on the service and what improvements or what services people actually want us to provide. So I'm not sure if, I know Nick's on the call, I'm not sure if Nick's got a more specific number that he's able to say.
Thanks, Mike. Not a specific number, but we have been really pleased lately, Councillor Hennessy, with the uptake in membership and in active involvement and participation from tenants. We've done a couple of things really. We've done a number of taster days where we've invited people along who probably have never been involved before. And we've also used our tenant profiling data to target people who may be interested or have expressed an interest in some of our other initiatives and tried to sell them the idea of engagement. Some of the meetings that I've been at previously has been a good sort of representative mix. Previously, the group has been sort of mainly around sort of older residents and sheltered residents, but we've had some younger people getting involved and bringing sort of new sort of experiences, new perspectives to the table really. So we're really pleased about that and looking to sustain and grow that as we go forward. But we're also quite pleased lately to have restarted the sheltered housing group. That's been dormant for a little while really, so that group has already met. And there's some further dates in the diary for further meetings. So it's good to see that group, which represents the 5 sheltered schemes across the council stock. So yeah, it falls out of the work we've done around the tenant engagement strategy, really. So yeah, we're making some good progress, but we can never engage as many tenants as we'd like. So still lots of work to do, really.
And my second question was, we go on a lot about digital and everything for people. How are we engaging with members of the community who are our tenants who don't go for computers and digital schemes?
Yeah, well, obviously, in terms of our existing council tenants, face-to-face is a biggie for us. Obviously, COVID was very, very difficult, where people were working from home, offices closed, etc. So since we've got back to normal, there's been a real focus and a concerted effort for staff to be out and about on estates. I'm in the office most days working, but the staff are out and about visiting communities, visiting tenants, knocking on doors and speaking to people. So that's always been something that we've prided ourselves in, and we're sort of making another focus on that now to make sure that we are accessible. People know we're in the area. We use things like our estate inspections and our communal block inspections, which is done at scheduled days each month, as an opportunity for people to speak to us. And when we're out on site, some of the staff, what they'll find is that people will know they're on site and make contact with them or give us a call and get in touch with us that way. So you're absolutely right. Digital is not for everybody. Increasingly, lots of transactions are digital, but there's no substitute in some instances, especially if you're talking about sensitive information or you haven't got the digital skills, something like that, for sort of a face-to-face conversation with a member of staff, really. So that's a big part of what we do.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
I see no one else wishing to speak, so I will say thank you very much to Mike and Nick and go to the recommendations. There are 2 recommendations. The first one is that we consider the performance results and progress towards the annual delivery plan 2023 to 24 commitments as aligned to our corporate plan wellbeing objectives within the remit of the committee. Are we happy to move and note that?
Yeah, happy to move and note.
Thank you, Councillor Hennessy.
Happy to move and note.
Thank you. The second recommendation is that we consider remedial actions to be taken to address areas of underperformance and to tackle the key challenges identified within the remit of the committee, with their views and recommendations referred thereafter to Cabinet for consideration and approval. I don't think we have any actual recommendations coming back from this committee, do we?
So no, Chair, I don't think there's any comments to go back. So if
just to move and note, yeah?
Note that if the committee and yourself are happy, Chair.
Okay, our committee happy to move and note.
Happy to move and note.
Thank you, Councillor Hennessy. Okay, so agenda item 10 is consultation. It's the white paper, Ending Homelessness in Wales. Nick, if you'd like to go ahead with that, please.
Thank you, Chair. This white paper consultation proposes significant changes to existing homelessness legislation and changes which are going to have a significant impact on the local authority, really. So a really important consultation that we're keen to sort of understand the implications of and respond to the consultation as well. The recommendation on the report is to consider the proposals tonight, and then to start to think about some of the key things that we would like to include in the formal response to the consultation. That formal response is due by the 16th of January 24, and I expect that will be approved by Cabinet before it gets submitted to the Welsh Government. The consultation document itself is in the papers, and it's quite long. I think it runs to 168 pages and includes some quite specific and detailed sort of legal aspects about specific proposals, really, regarding law and practice around homelessness. The cover report, which goes with the report, attempts to flag up perhaps some of the more the key issues or some of the more important things that are likely to impact on us, and I'll run through those shortly. But before I sort of dive into that sort of analysis, I just wanted to sort of share some sort of context and some background information, really, to help people position this white paper. And the Welsh Government's clearly stated aim really has been to end homelessness in Wales, and that work started several years ago, really, and led to the publication of a strategy at that time, preventing and ending homelessness in Wales. The approach, however, sort of coincided with the advent of COVID and some external factors at that time as well, the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis as well. So it led really to a further commitment to fundamentally reform homelessness services and build on the progress which was made during COVID, what we call the Everyone In campaign, where during the public health emergency, people were no longer on the streets, not able to share accommodation, sofa surfing, etc., and were provided with accommodation by local authorities, not just in the Vale, but across Wales, really. So this consultation is sort of looking to build on that work. It's an expert panel was convened to develop the specific proposals, and the panel undertook a significant amount of consultation, both with partners, stakeholders, but also with people with lived experience of homelessness as well. And it was that sort of extensive consultation and that detailed feedback really which shaped the proposals we see today in this white paper. There's four key sections in the white paper, really. The first is about the reform of core homelessness legislation. The second is related to the broadening of responsibilities and the broadening of the roles of other public bodies in Wales to tackle homelessness. The third is to do with targeted prevention. And lastly, access to accommodation. So I'll come through, I'll talk through some of the main things under each of those four key areas now, and hopefully that will give people a bit of a more of a sense of what we're talking about with this white paper. So firstly, the reform of the core housing legislation. There's a number of things in here. The first thing to mention really was the extension of time for a person that is threatened with homelessness. So the white paper proposes to extend that to 6 months. It's currently 56 days. So anyone who's potentially homeless at 56 days at the moment is entitled to advice and assistance and help from us. The legislation is proposing to extend that time to 6 months. And the rationale for that is logical, really, is to give us a more opportunity to work with people, better prospects for trying to prevent a tenancy failing. And it also coincides with the notice periods required for the new occupation contracts, which have been introduced via the Renting Homes Wales Act. So it sort of makes the homelessness legislation consistent with the renting homes legislation, if you like. There's also a statutory duty being proposed for a personalised housing plan. We call these PHPs. When people present as homeless, this is the plan that we put together of agreed actions that we are going to take and they're going to take in order to either prevent or resolve their homelessness. So we carry out personalised housing plans at the moment, but the changes are proposing a statutory duty to take into account applicants' views. So where if people have got a preference to live in a particular area or a particular type of accommodation, we've got a duty to take account of that. And we've also got a requirement, or we would have a requirement to review those personal housing plans on a regular basis. And I think it's proposing every 8 weeks. There's a right as well for applicants to request a review of their personalised housing plan if there's things in there which they think are missing or the things that they don't agree with. And there's also a broadened right to review of suitability of any properties that are offered. So people would be able to make an appeal regarding suitability at any time. Currently, it's within 21 days of making an offer, so there's a more limited window. The legislation proposes to abolish the priority needs test and the intentionality test. So these currently limit the amount of assistance that we provide, and we try and target that to the people in greatest need. So priority needs, to give you an example, of families with children, people who are vulnerable because of a disability, etc. So this Act is proposing to get rid of those tests for priority need so that everybody's entitled to the same level of assistance. Intentionality is rarely used, but that's where people are deemed to have caused their own homelessness, either through giving up accommodation, which was reasonable for them to occupy, or sometimes maybe severe antisocial behaviour, which has led to them losing their property. So at the moment, there's an intentionality clause where we can find somebody is intentionally homeless, and that affects the assistance that we provide. But this white paper is proposing to sweep away that intentionality test in future. There's a third test which we've referred to very often as the local connection test, and the white paper is proposing to retain the local connection test. So people, to be eligible to receive assistance from us in the Vale of Glamorgan, people would have to have a local connection. But what this white paper is proposing is to make some exceptions to that local connection, and specifically people who have got a care experience, people who have been within the care system, victims of domestic abuse, prison leavers, armed forces leavers. So just some examples of some groups of people there who would not be subject to the local connection test in future. And if they wanted assistance in the Vale of Glamorgan, would be eligible to receive assistance from us. And the final thing on the core homelessness legislation, really, there's a narrowing of the test for unreasonable failure to comply. So the only time we could close down a case really is if an applicant has been threatening to staff, or there has been consistent non-cooperation over a period of time. So those are some of the changes in terms of the core legislation. The second key area that I mentioned was just broadening the role of the public service. So a recognition, I guess, that homelessness is a societal problem, not something specifically or only for housing options teams within local authorities. So that seems quite logical. There's a duty being proposed in the white paper for public bodies to identify and refer people who are at risk of being homeless, and refer them across to our housing options team at the council. There's also a duty to refer. The duty to refer people across is also accompanied by a duty to take action within their functions to sustain tenancies and mitigate the risk of homelessness. So it's just to try and make sure that other services are behaving in a way that's compatible with what we're trying to do, and also reducing homelessness. So those are some of the changes there. So there's a suggestion in the white paper in terms of duty to cooperate and of establishing joint homelessness boards at a regional level to coordinate these services. There's already a duty. We expect people to cooperate with us already, other agencies, but sometimes that happens, other times it doesn't. So I think the expert panel have identified some scope for firming up that and strengthening the obligations put on other public bodies to come to the table and work closely with us to resolve homelessness. The third section of the white paper is related to targeted prevention, and this arises from the data which shows us that certain groups of people are more likely to become homeless. So that might be care leavers, prison leavers, disabled people. So the paper is proposing some specific measures and some specific proposals regarding each of those groups really who are overrepresented amongst the homeless population. So there's things in there about strengthening the corporate parenting responsibilities in relation to care leavers, ensuring that 16 and 17-year-olds are always provided with supported housing rather than more general needs type of accommodation. Homelessness is considered as part of hospital discharge planning. So if somebody's not able to go home or hasn't got a home, that's a factor that needs to be taken account of. And also reviewing the existing pathways that are in place for prison leavers and armed forces veterans as well, to make sure that those groups of people get the assistance that they need. The fourth and final sort of main section of the white paper relates to access to accommodation. And this is concerned with trying to ensure that homeless people access suitable accommodation. It sets specific forms of accommodation that are never suitable. And examples being category 1 hazards, where properties are dangerous or unsafe, and also shared floor space. We don't provide shared floor space in the Vale anyway, but previously in some local authorities, there had been shared floor space in hostel type environments. But it also goes on to say about bed and breakfast for under 25s never being suitable. There are also tougher suitability tests and examples being that properties must be close to employment, services, medical facilities if people are receiving treatment, or to caregivers or care receivers if people are in receipt of care. A few other bits in this part of this section as well. There's a new duty being proposed for housing associations, RSLs, to accept nominations from the council. There's an ability for councils to remove households who are not in housing need from the housing waiting list. Quite a large number of people on the waiting list at the moment are bronze banded, so classified effectively as having no housing needs. So there's a proposal there about focusing the housing waiting list for people who are actually in housing need. A requirement for councils to operate common housing registers. We already do this in the Vale, and a lot of areas do, but there will be other areas in Wales where there isn't a common housing register, and potentially not a single point of entry into social housing in that area. And lastly, a new deliberate manipulation test to try and cut down on people gaming the system. What we find is that when housing is in such short supply as it is at the moment, a small number of people hopefully would look to contrive their circumstances or go through a homeless route in order to get a priority and in order to secure accommodation. So the white paper is proposing a deliberate manipulation test. There isn't information or detail regarding what that looks like, what questions get asked, or how that gets established, but I think an awareness and an acknowledgement that that is an area that needs to be tightened up really. So a lot of changes being proposed in the white paper. In terms of a starting point for the discussion, I guess everyone was sharing the Welsh Government's commitment to end homelessness. We don't want anyone sort of not having a place to live within the Vale of Glamorgan, but it's challenging at the moment with the priority needs tests, with the intentionality test, the local connection. It's very difficult to provide accommodation for people who are homeless as it is. So I think one of the things that officers will be concerned about is broadening the pool of people that we provide assistance to and increasing our responsibilities to people as well, thinking specifically about suitability of properties. At the moment, we try and provide a property. It's not always in an area where someone would want to be, and maybe it might not be exactly the type of accommodation that people would want. It might be a flat rather than a house. But what we'd be concerned about with some of the proposals here regarding suitability is that we're already struggling to provide accommodation. So we're going to struggle. It's going to raise the bar in terms of what we're required to do, and also expectations of people as well, and make it very, very difficult for us in a lot of cases to provide the assistance that people would expect. We've raised this already with Welsh Government, and they share, they understand the pressures that we're under, and have sort of acknowledged that. And I think where they come from at the moment is that these are aspirational targets. These are things that we would like to achieve in future. I think where we're slightly concerned is that we're sort of on a day-to-day basis dealing with some pretty tricky situations at the moment, and find it very hard to find lots of housing solutions. So when is this, when's it more likely to, when's this going to ease? Is it going to ease? And how realistic is it to think about some of the proposals that are being talked about? So I'll probably pause there, Chair, if that's okay, before I ramble on too much. But hopefully I've given people an idea of the key things that are set out in the white paper, the background to them, and a bit more of a detail regarding what the Welsh Government are meaning by them. Because, as I say, it is a very long white paper document. It's a lot of pages there, and I wouldn't expect everyone to have read through it in detail and be as tuned into them as we are. So hopefully that helps and starts the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nick. I can see we do have somebody waiting to speak, but I just want to say that I admire the aspirational aspects of this paper, but I do have concerns over how it's going to be managed. As you did say, that Welsh Government are aware of the challenges that local government faces, but I have to wonder what kind of help they're going to give us to reach these aims, if any. You probably can't answer that at the moment, so I will bring in Councillor Payne. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. So I do have dispensation to talk and to vote on issues of housing and homelessness, which I would have declared at the beginning of the meeting. There's some points on page 5, Nick, of your summary, and I just wanted to clarify. It's point 2.54, and it's around under 25s always having an option of supported accommodation. I just wanted to explore it, really, because that would be a massive pull on the resources of the council. So it says this should always be supported housing. So what is that for me? Having managed supported accommodation, and I know the costs involved. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's a worry, and we get a lot of people under 25% into the service. So I'm not talking about care leavers now.
No, not at all.
Pathway for care leavers and support, and we also do operate a lot of supported housing schemes, but there is limited capacity for those schemes. So we tend to end up housing people where we've got vacancies, and that could be at the hotel, it could be in shared accommodation, and we provide floating support then to those individuals in that location. If we weren't able to house under 25s in a hotel type environment, then I'm not sure where we would provide them accommodation within in the short term. Clearly, over the long term, in theory, we could increase the supply, we could build more accommodation, we could develop more supported housing. But bearing in mind some of the conversations we were having earlier on, really, about budget pressures and about being realistic and looking to cut money rather than invest money. This is the sort of the bit which I struggle with, really, because I'd love everyone under 25 to be in a supported environment. That seems a sensible aim to have, but in terms of where we are now and the gap between that and there, it's a long way, and it would require significant investment, money which we don't have at the moment.
That's right. And the other part of it also is about choice. So we're talking about personal housing plans at the beginning. So, if they didn't want to go down that route, they would only have to go for the option that was available to them anyway. So I was just, there's a bit of a conflict in what they're saying in terms of where people should be housed and where people want to be housed. So that was a bit of a conflict in the whole of the report. And you're right, it is 168 pages. And then the other point on page 5, Chair, if I may, is 2.5.8, and that is the bit the unacceptable behaviour bit. Obviously, we know that, you know, massive trauma involved with people who are made homeless for whatever reason. So I'd be interested in what is unacceptable behaviour, and do the housing staff have training, and are they trauma informed? Are they psychologically informed in terms of what the people who are presenting as homeless go through? Because people behave in very strange ways. This is a two-pronged question. And also, what protections are there for the staff, the homelessness staff at the Vale, in dealing with these issues? So it's a two-sided question. I have, you know, no opinion, you know, on either. It's just, you know, we want the staff protected, but we also want to provide a service for those who are probably at the most traumatic time in their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, we recognise when people are getting in touch with us, there's an awful lot of trauma. They could be issues which led to their homelessness, or it might be the stress and the anxiety that just being homeless is causing people, really. So, you know, we're used to people fairly animated, sometimes shouting, occasionally aggressive, and the staff are trained and prepared and used to dealing with that. We don't, you know, we don't turn people away. Obviously, if there's a risk or a threat to anybody, then that's different. The white paper, when it's talking about this, talks about, I think it was made of behaviour which is likely to have resulted in an outright possession order if somebody was a tenant. So that being the unreasonable behaviour. But what we tend to find is that, you know, if somebody is animated, maybe it is a time to stop the interview and re-adjourn at a different time, or to reconvene with a support worker present, or a friend, or somebody else. We try and make sure that we engage with absolutely everybody as long as it's safe to do so. The question that you asked about trauma informed, etc. Our support providers are all trauma informed. It's a big focus on that when we tender those contracts. It's something that we look for and we require. So, you know, the staff who are delivering these services in the front line to vulnerable people hopefully do feel that they've got the skills and the support to be able to do their job. And, you know, we monitor that through the contract review meetings with support providers, team meetings within our own housing solutions team, and just sort of day-to-day feedback and monitoring, and by line managers and other managers as well. It's a really tricky job, both providing support and in the housing solutions team. And, you know, we do get high rates of burnout. So providing the support that we need to enable really good staff to continue to be able to do what they do is vital for us.
Great, thank you for your answer, and thank you for all the hard work on getting through the 168 pages and making it understandable.
Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. Not really any questions, and yes, I agree with you, Nick. There's a lot in there that's going to make this a lot of work for a lot of council officials and employees. There's a few things that stand out, and thanks for your précis, because I tried to wade through some of the pages of the white paper, and it beat me. So I take you to 2.22, the statutory personal housing plan section. I think that at 8 weeks is going to cause undue stress on council employees, particularly with the numbers of homeless that we have at the moment. I would like us to put it towards the Welsh Government that maybe it should start at a higher in a time span, perhaps 12 weeks, and then work towards an 8 weeks plan. And then the 2.24, the abolition of the priority need, I do think that will unduly disadvantage disabled people, or at least people with some disabilities, which is the same with the 2.25, retention of local connection tests with exemptions. Maybe it's in the white paper, but I really feel that people with certain disabilities should be exempt from the local connection test, because quite often people with caring needs especially need to be near well, their friends, family, their support network. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hayes. In terms of the personalised housing plan, yeah, I absolutely agree. The high level of presentations that we have at the moment and the relatively small team that they're under pressure at the moment, really. So being obliged by law to ensure that everyone gets a meeting and formal review of their PHPs every week is going to be really tricky within the existing staff capacity. And whilst the obvious thing is then, we need to increase the staff capacity, this brings us right back to the budget conversations again of, we're looking to sort of streamline and cut expenditure, not grow those caseloads. But one of the things that we are doing at the moment with PHPs is trying to empower people to take more action for themselves. And I think in a lot of cases, this works really well. And speaking to the case officers very recently, really, there's some really good examples of people coming in and we're pointing them in the right direction, giving them a steer and some information about various things, and they're going off and doing a lot of legwork themselves, and that really helps the team. There are some other individuals who maybe haven't got the capacity to do that or aren't able to do that, and that puts a lot of burden on the team to make these inquiries. So I think what we're trying to do with the PHPs at the moment, and will continue to do really, is really empower people to take charge of those PHPs themselves and take a lot of the action that themselves as well. Moving on to the point about priority need, I was at a sort of an event recently, and somebody made a comment really and said that, well, if in future everyone is a priority, then effectively nobody is a priority. And I think that sort of stuck with me really. So when you talk then about care receivers and disabled people, then that is something that we'd be worried about, because up to now, where people in priority need, we've been able to always ensure that they've got somewhere to stay and somewhere safe and somewhere to live. In future, if we had more accommodation, then we want everyone to be in that position as well. But by making everyone a priority, it is a danger and a worry really, especially to those marginalised groups or people with extra barriers really.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Lloyd-Selby, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nick, for taking us through it. I also tried to get through as much of it as I could so that, I had a good understanding of what's being proposed, because a significant amount of the contact I have with residents is about people contacting me over issues to do with homelessness or impending homelessness. So I'm really, very well aware of the pressure that people are facing, but also the pressure that the council is facing in terms of the reality of the options that are available to people. So I suppose, one of my questions is, do we think that Welsh Government has a baseline understanding of the reality of the situation, of the pressure around homelessness and accommodation in Wales at the moment? Because I do think that's important in terms of whatever the final legislation looks like. It's comforting to hear you say that in some ways much of this is aspirational, but legislation is legislation and carries with it statutory duties and requirements in most instances. So I do think it's important in terms of timescales that we are confident that there's that understanding. It's also good to hear you say that there are many things that the white paper is proposing that we're already doing in the Vale. So that's really good news. I'm assuming, because the white paper was issued in October, that we've already done some work around this. So do we know what our baseline position is in terms of what would need to change and what additional capacity we would require within the Vale and over what timescales in order to be able to comply with the legislation, if it actually becomes legislation in the form in which it's set out in the white paper?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. I share your concerns, and then to sort of reassure you in terms of our conversations, our meetings, our relationship with Welsh Government, we never miss an opportunity to highlight the current challenges that we face, and we're not on our own. Cardiff, Bridgend, Swansea, equally as vociferous really, and prepared to sort of really highlight that to Welsh Government officials, so that they are aware of this situation, and they are sympathetic to that. But I share your concern, is that those warm words don't help us if we're in a position in 2 years' time where this is legislation, we're required to do things. So I think that we haven't been informed exactly when these changes would come into effect. I think at this point it's more about, is the white paper correct? Is the legislation changing in the correct way? And conversations carry on. Welsh Government are coming in just after Christmas, early on in January, to meet with us, with the homelessness team and other key staff within the local authority. So they continue to be sort of in listening mode, really, in having that conversation with us and with others as well. But there are no firm indications of timescales, so that we're not getting an indication of a date where this will have to be enacted or we'll have to do that. All we're hearing is that people understand the pressures now, but hope that we're going to be able to transition towards this model of approach in future, albeit with no specific date.
Yeah, thank you. And I know within the document itself, in terms of consultation questions, there is a question about resources. It is in there. So we will get the opportunity to go back to Welsh Government and say, this is the reality of the resource implications for us as a local authority in terms of complying with this. And as you rightly said at the beginning, we would all absolutely support the intention to move towards a Wales where no one is homeless. But clearly there are resource implications, and not just for us, because again, the white paper rightly sets out that this has broader implications for other public bodies. So, for example, I think I read in there that health will not be able to discharge somebody back into homelessness. Good, but that has implications for health services. It also clearly has implications for the care sector. So my other question is in terms of how we're formulating our response as a local authority. Who else are we engaging with? Are we engaging with some of those key partners who will also, for whom this will also have implications?
Yeah, organisations like Health will be part of the consultation themselves, so they'll provide their own response. But as part of our corporate response, clearly there are implications for social services, thinking of children's services in terms of care leavers, etc., adult services in terms of older people as well. So we are liaising internally with other departments and also with key partner agencies as well, the housing associations. They will have an opportunity to respond directly in addition. But if there are key themes and messages and issues that they are experiencing and they're worrying about, we might also want to reflect those within our response as well, because that will really layer the message. Because what we want to do is make sure we take this opportunity and make sure that any concerns that we have and things which we agree with as well, because there's a lot in there that is good news, but really sort of make sure that comes across loud and clear. And we get that formalized in terms of the response. So we've already started pulling the response together, but conversations like tonight, feedback from other teams and other departments, and ongoing conversations will continue to sort of add to that in terms of the detail, really. And
finally, for me, with your indulgence, Chair,
quickly, thank you.
This is a public consultation. It would be very helpful if the response could be shared with this committee, and also if we could have updates as appropriate as this white paper moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, I believe you wanted to come back in on that. I believe you wanted to come in on this, I should say.
Yeah, just very briefly, I attended a meeting with Welsh Government officials on Monday afternoon, together with the Housing Cabinet member leads of all local authorities. The WLGA is the representative body of local authorities and is intending to respond as well. I think the flavour of the discussion from Cabinet members, Housing Cabinet members, resonates with the conversation we're having tonight. And in relation to some of the discussion around what was very clear is concerns around unintended consequences of the legislation. the contra-measures, the inconsistency, I think councillors have raised tonight. I think Nick's concern we all share, and across local authorities we all share, that when resources are limited, clearly we operate in a resource allocation mode. And therefore, regardless of the legislation, that I think one of our concerns is that in the absence of accommodation, what is a local authority supposed to do if it brings you into disrepute with the statutory position that we're in? Nick mentioned listening. My concern with Welsh Government at the moment is, are they hearing? They say they're listening, which you know, in terms of the amount of effort and energy they're putting into consultation at the moment, a huge amount of consultation events going on. But I do wonder, we've been Nick mentions at every opportunity at local authority level, at regional level, at national level, we've been having conversations with Welsh Government around what we saw were going to be the impact of implementing the Renting Homes Act immediately after a crisis like COVID, and what that has done in terms of some of the macroeconomic issues that we now face in terms of a diminishing private rented sector. Clearly, Welsh Government wouldn't necessarily have seen the impact of inflation and those issues in relation to the cost of living measures at the time that these proposals were being initially considered. As Nick mentioned, this has been an ongoing process for many years now. This isn't something that has happened in isolation post-COVID. But what I reflect in terms of the discussion with Welsh Government this week, they recognise that there isn't the resources or the capacity, should all of the measures that are in the white paper be implemented, they're not available at the local level, let alone at the national level. They did mention aspirational, and you know, we do have concerns that, you know, legislation, once it's implemented, the local authority is statutorily obliged to follow that legislation. And in terms of the indication at that meeting, it is proposed that the white paper will become a bill in the lifetime of this Welsh Government Parliament. In terms of when it actually receives royal assent and actually becomes law, you know, there was no definitive position given. There was an indication that they would probably look to see that elements of the legislation would be implemented first, or in a managed way, based on circumstances at the time. We all know, you know, I've 35 years I've been in housing. This is the most difficult period that I've ever seen. And I think I answered earlier, somebody asked about a plateau. I don't think we're anywhere near the summit yet, but ultimately, the way that we have to, it'll be a longer term plan to deal with the issue of housing supply and capacity and resources. We need to build more affordable housing. We need to have a private rented sector that is viable and provides alternative opportunities other than social housing. At the moment, Nick mentioned the discussion around common registers and allocations policies. Well, at the moment, one of the adverse consequences could be that if we are only rehousing people who we have a statutory homeless duty, and that safety net has been widened to the extent that is being envisaged, there's very little point having a housing register, because we'll only be effectively rehousing people who are homeless. And to a certain extent, you know, for the members that are being contacted by residents at the moment, the messaging that you will be getting back from the solutions team and from myself and officers is that's the reality of the situation today. You know, the vast majority of our accommodation is going to people for whom we have current statutory duties. And my concern for my staff more so is how frustrating it can be. My staff are people who have great empathy for the clients that they're working with, the people that they're working with, and the frustration they must feel in not being able to put forward a viable solution for those people is extremely demoralising and frustrating for them at the moment. So I hope that Welsh Government are hearing, and I hope, and I think you mentioned, do we think Welsh Government know the cost, the capacity, the resources? They don't at the moment. I think it's fair to say one of the requirements in the new legislation is about improving data flow and information. And I think the conversations at the local authority level in terms of what does this look like on the ground and what might it look like, so the as is and the what if in the future, I think is an important conversation for us. And that's certainly the message that we'll be giving our Welsh Government colleagues when they come and speak to us shortly. But I thought it just to add a little bit of the flavour of what's happening at the national level as well.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? No. Okay, well, the recommendation for this was that we consider the proposed changes brought forward by this paper and identify key impacts which will inform the council's response to the consultation. I'm glad we had some speakers because the comments that were raised here tonight will be included in a report back to Cabinet with the draft consultation response. Are we happy for that to happen?
Happy for that to happen.
Yeah, happy to move that. Okay.
Just on that, Chair, very quickly, what I'll do as part of the recommendation, I'll just put a flavour of the comments that have been made tonight in the
Yes,
recommendation. Please. So that will assist in the consultation process. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I believe that is everything on the agenda. Okay, yeah. I have no items urgent under part 1 or items that are urgent under part 2. So before I call an end to this meeting, I just want to say thank you everybody for your patience tonight with the technical difficulties we've had. And for those that have come to the chamber, thank you. It's been wonderful to see you in person after so long. And I hope to see you all. I hope to see more of you in the chamber next time. Thank you.